Oh, oh my God. Oh, it's so good. This is the best bit about food photography. Hi, I'm Raj K, and welcome to my living room for another masterclass. This week, it's food photography. Food photography isn't my main area, but I do really enjoy it. Food photography is a lot of fun. The way I think about it is it's effectively product photography. So I'm going to be showing you my approach to it as product photography. Much in the same way as I approach portraiture, I approach food and product photography thinking about visual storytelling. I'm picking a product or a food and I'm trying to tell a story about it. So the environment in which I shoot it, the props I put with it, they all have to complement the subject. There's so many different approaches to this. You can go ultra minimalist, you can go really bright and airy, you can go really bright and colourful, you can go quite moody, you can use natural light, you can use flash. So I'm going to show you a little bit of a mix of everything, and hopefully you'll get a better idea of the style that you really like, and you'll learn some great techniques to help you achieve that look so you can create this stuff at home. I must preface this by saying that while I'm a half decent cook, I'm no chef. We'll try photographing my lunch, but mostly we're going to be shooting cakes, biscuits, drinks, that sort of thing. If you've watched some of my other videos, there will be some overlap in this, and I will take you through flash again. Another thing I'm going to go back over is shooting tethered, but I'll put that at the end, so if you've seen it already, you don't have to watch it again. For this shoot, I will be shooting on an EOS R, this beast. I love this camera. I often shoot on a 5D Mark IV as well as a EOS R, but 90% of the time when I'm given the choice between the two, I'll pick up the EOS R. The focusing is that much more accurate on this system, and that's all powered by the dual pixel AF system. Dual pixel AF is the technology that Canon have that makes it different from everyone else. It allows for the focusing to work so smoothly and so accurately that I no longer use my digital SLRs because the on-sensor focusing system on this is so much better. We're going to be using Speedlights for this project. If you watched my last video, you'll know how much I love Speedlights. Speedlights are absolutely amazing. They are small, powerful, versatile, and you can create so much with them. I actually use the 600 EX Mark IIs. I have a couple of them, and the transmitter, which is this STE3RT, very catchy name. This is the transmitter that sits on top of the camera and communicates with the flash guns. They communicate via radio, so you don't have to have them line of sight. There's two-way communication as well, so I can actually tell the camera to take a picture from the flash gun if I have the camera on a tripod and I don't have a light stand for some reason. You can get a whole range of modifiers for flash guns. They're even weather sealed. I can't say a bad word against them. So if you've not used Speedlights before, I'll show you how they work. When you turn the Speedlight on, you'll be met with ETTL mode. Just that there. To link them, all you do is you hit that little link button and you'll see lots of options. These are radio, and I want it as radio slave. So that way it's ready to receive commands from this. You see the little lights have gone green now. That means it's ready and it's linked and paired. I can hit the fire button on this and it creates a flash. By default, the flash trigger is on ETTL mode, which is basically fully automatic. It fires a pre-flash, which the camera registers, can see what the flash is doing, and then determines the flash power and the metering of the camera all automatically for you. What that doesn't take into account is creative control. So I want to be able to manipulate multiple flashes at different powers and have full creative control. So what I recommend doing is hitting the mode button just there, and that's fully manual, but that's manual for all groups, and you can control different groups in ratios. What I want is to be able to control them individually, so I'll move across to group, so GR. That way I can go in and I can set each group to whatever I want. I can turn it off, I can put it on ETTL, I can put it in manual, and then all I'm working with is dimmer switches on each group. So I can go higher and lower, and it's as simple as that. And when working with flashes in fully manual, you're essentially only working with dimmer switches, which makes it far simpler to understand and work with. Alright, let's set up for the shoot and I'll show you how it's all going to work. Oh my god, these smells so good. We're going to start with something simple. Cookies and milk. mostly because I want to eat them first. I'm just going to shoot this on my desk with daylight only, because that's something you'll likely always have. It's just a nice simple setup with window light. Thankfully I have a beautiful desk that suits this look, which I made myself. Check out Wood Rehab, yeah, on Etsy. What I'm going to do is stack the cookies up on my desk and see what it looks like. I mean, it already looks delicious actually, so job done. Gonna find the cookiest looking cookie. Jade wants to give away the cookies. That is not happening. When shooting with window light, I like to have the window on the side, so the light's coming in sideways to what I'm photographing. That way you get a bit of shadow. If I had the windows behind me and all the window light going straight onto the subject, it'd be very flat, very boring. It's just not cricket, is what I wanted to say there. That's a weird thing to say. It's just not an interesting image. So I've stacked up my cookies, they look nice. All I need now is some milk. Got soy milk, because I don't have real milk. I've just got simple white walls and a wooden desk to shoot this on. And I'm just going to use a big aperture to get that nice shallow depth of field, and hopefully it'll look lovely. I'll turn the light off that's illuminating my face. Alright, so I didn't really like the white background. What I've gone for now is a black background. All I've done to do that is just hang up the black side of a reflector. I've rearranged the cookies as well, just to play around a little bit, and just leaned the cookies up against the glass. There is a word in there somewhere. And I've just propped the cookies up against the side of the glass, and I've gone for a really tight shot. I've also gone for a longer lens, so I've gone for a 100mm macro. The reason for this is that way I can get a bit more of the compression and reduce some of the distortion around the edges. I'm also shooting from a very low angle, so I'm almost getting below the line of the table. So I'm shooting at the same level as the cookies. If I shoot from slightly higher up, all I'm going to get then is the table in the background, which also might look nice. In terms of camera settings, I'm shooting at about f5, which may seem like quite a small aperture and would suggest I'm getting a lot in, but because I'm shooting quite close to the subject with a 100mm lens, the depth of field is so shallow at 2.8 that I'm only getting a few of the first chocolate chips in focus and nothing else. So I want there to be enough depth of field for all of the cookies to be in focus, and then it starts to fall off. My shutter speed is at 80th of a second because I can hand hold that fine, and this lens has image stabilization, and then my ISO is at 800 currently. Ideally, you would want to set up a tripod for this, but setting up tripods doesn't really suit the way I like to shoot. I like to try out lots of angles, and I find tripods a little bit too constraining. But once you find an angle that you like, it's worth setting up a tripod and getting the best possible image quality you can. It's worth thinking about what you're going to do with these images once you've shot them. If they're going to be used for advertising and you're going to have text around them, leave space for text in your composition. If they're going on Instagram, it might be worth shooting in portrait to maximize the amount of space it takes up on the screen. Or if you're shooting it for stock, it's worth getting a variety of all of these, so you have options for all of these. That way you have plenty of choice afterwards. I'm going for a really simple minimalist setup here. Often I would add some details like scatter some chocolate chips or whatever around the table, but I'm sort of shooting this in a way that you'd be able to shoot this if you're out and about and taking photos in a cafe, if you're a food blogger or something like that. Oh, finally. Oh my God. It's so good. I've just decided to photograph my lunch because why not? Let's make it look pretty. I'm going to do this as an overhead shot, so like a flat lay. Flat lays are all about looking down at your subject from above, completely bird's eye view. It's a surprisingly addictive way of shooting because you're not really used to seeing things from top down. It's quite a nice perspective. Jacob was very kindly sent a grow your own mushroom kit from Sam and Gavin Hoey. Thank you both so much, they were so tasty. So what we're going to do is I'm going to cook up some mushrooms, put them on the table with some nice toasted bread, and hopefully we'll get a cool picture out of it. So what I've got is a flash gun here that's mounted to the pole on my desk. That's pointing down at a diagonal angle towards the food. And that one has a little softbox on it, and that's just going to be adding some fill light so that the other side of the food is nice and soft as well. That light there isn't a speed light for once. I just happen to have one of my bonus lights set up, mounted to the desk anyway for something else. So I'm just going to use that for now. Saves me setting something else up. A speed light would do absolutely the same job though. That white bit you see on the front there, that's a slight diffusion sheet. So I've got a small diffusion panel on the front of it and a quarter CTO gel on there. So it add a little bit of warmth, it'll look a little bit more like sunset then. And it just, there's a lot of warm tones in this image, so I'm going to try and help that with a little bit of an orange gel. The other light doesn't have a gel on it, so we get a nice balance between the two. That light there is going to be at about 2 times the power of the one in the softbox, because that's essentially the dominant light in the image. That should give us some nice shadows. If we had them at the same power, you'd lose all the shadows and then you'd lose all the depth. And to get a moody image, you want some shadows in there. So I'm just going to use my boom arm to mount my camera onto. That way it's in a static position above the food and I don't have to keep standing over it. I'm also going to be shooting tethered. Shooting tethered is such a practical way of doing stuff like this for all kinds of product photography. It means that you can have the camera set up on a tripod in slightly difficult positions to be in. Like an overhead shot like this, I'd have to be standing on the table or leaning over the table, and realistically I'm just not tall enough to do that. Also, I'm then able to really look at the details, take my time, zoom into small sections on a nice big screen. I've got all of the controls, the same controls on the camera. I can fully change all the settings and play with the camera from here. I don't have to do the awkward photographer stances. I can just stand back and do it on the computer. Alright, so I'm reasonably happy with the lighting. All we need to do now is just add some props in there. Just little details like salt and pepper or some herbs and the mushrooms. And I also need to cook my lunch. I'm going to go cook my lunch and I'll pick up with you after. We have a beautiful selection of cakes that I definitely baked myself. Definitely. Can you not see my artistry here? I'm joking. I'm joking, obviously, because I can't bake. But luckily, Gemma from the Copper Kitchen can, and she's made us all of these lovely things. For this set, I'm going for a light area, more floral, prettier look, if you like, which is very different from my normal style of shooting. I tend to go for very moody lighting and quite cinematic look, so this will be quite interesting. One thing I like to bring into my imagery is visual storytelling. And as I said in my previous videos, this can be applied to all sorts of photography. Food photography is no different, so I'll approach this in the same way. The lighting, the setting, the props and the colours all need to suit the subject that I'm shooting. So for this I'm going for a vintage tea party look. We've got a vintage phone, we've got a sort of shabby chic type desk going on, and I'm just going to throw it all together and see what it looks like. I'm going to light it quite bright, and I will be using a combination of flash and daylight for this. We're losing a bit of daylight today because it's quite cloudy, so we'll see. So it'll probably be predominantly, oh that's a difficult sentence. So it'll probably be predominantly flash. So for this I'm working with both daylight and flash. To go about that, I will first find a composition that I like. So I've been playing around with this for quite a while now, and what I found is that the flat on thing doesn't quite work for me. What I was envisaging there was having a flat on image that looks quite two-dimensional, with plenty of space above, so that way you could have space for text. So you can imagine having that as an invite for afternoon tea, or as an advertisement for your tea business. But that doesn't quite work for me, so what I've gone for is something with a little bit more depth. The next comes the lighting. Now the window light is looking lovely, with a little reflector, it's looking pretty good. However, I think we can improve on that a little bit. I want it to be a little bit brighter, I want it to be a little bit punchier, and I want to bring out those pinks a little bit more. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put in a flash. I did just try putting a softbox over the subjects, and it didn't look very nice. And the reason for that is it's not soft enough. So the softness of the light is dictated by the size of the light source relative to the subject. Now the softbox is reasonably big, and I only have one size bigger than that, which might be enough to get the look that I'm going for. But there's a much simpler way of going about it. Instead of going for a bigger and bigger softbox, all I'm going to do is use the ceiling and make the ceiling my light source. So what I'm going to do is just have a bare flash pointed at the ceiling, and it's going to bounce and spread that light to make a huge light source. There's a couple of things to note when you do that. It's worth having the flash zoomed out. Thanks to inverse square law, you're also going to use about 4 times more power from your flash gun. And now I am using Speedlights, and they're still going to be more than powerful enough to do that in here. But it's just something to be aware of when you're out and about, because if you need to shoot quickly and the flash power is really high up, it can slow the recycling time. And that's true of plugged-in flashes as well as battery power flashes. I'm still going to link this up wirelessly. I'm not going to have the flash on my camera. It just allows me a little bit more control over where that flash is going to be located in the room. The other thing to be aware of is when you mount the flash on a stand, it needs to be higher than the subject. Otherwise you're going to get some light coming directly from the flash, and that will create some harsh light and the strange shadows that we don't really want. And that should provide just the right amount of light. Okay, so instead of doing the two-dimensional sort of flat, straight-on look, I've gone for a diagonal approach, and it's given the image much more depth. I've put the cakes right at the front, first and foremost, because they're the most important part of the shot. I've also changed out the phone and gone for something a little bit softer and a little bit more floral, with the same sort of colour scheme as everything else in the shot. And it's working so much nicer. So while the food is the most important thing, the props I'm using really tie the image together. So the Copper Kitchen kindly lent us the cake stands and the teapots, and they really suit this high tea look that I'm going for. And now what we need is to add in some details. So I'm just going to scatter some of the extra meringue we have around the table. When it comes to balancing daylight and flash, the easiest way to go about it is to start with the ambient. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn off the flash trigger. So I'll set the exposure to how I like the image, and then I'll bring in the flash. I find that's the easiest way to get a nice balanced look. I'm using a 100mm macro lens, and part of the reason I'm using a 100mm lens is that with that longer focal length you're going to get a lot more compression. And because I'm shooting diagonally, I've got this approach of depth going on. I want that compression so that things look a bit nicer. What I'll do is I'll shoot a few images on a wider lens and show you the difference. That's what I'll do. The other reason I'm shooting on macro is I can focus really close and pick out those small details. That way I can really show the quality of the product. I'm going to change things up a little bit now and go for an overhead flat lay type look and see how that looks, just to give a different perspective on the same subject. With flat lays you've got a lot of options. You can go for quite a scattered, busy look, but if you're shooting this for a specific product, that should be the main focus, and all the other props shouldn't detract from your main subject. The other things you can do with flat lays is allow space for text. So I'll show you a couple of these. Now that we've done some pretty stuff with lots of elements, lots of little cakes and details, I'm going to bring it back down to something quite small and simple, and I'm going to go for quite a dramatic, moodier look, but this time only using flash, and I'm going to overpower a lot of the daylight. That way I'm getting full control of the lighting and I'm not dependent on the weather or the clouds coming in and out, or there being window light in the location that I'm shooting in. So I'm going to shoot a couple of the individual products that Copper Kitchen have given us. I'm definitely going to go for the brownies, and maybe I'll try a few others. I'm going to shoot the cakesicles because they just look really cool. And now because I'm going for a moody look, I quite want a dark background. There's multiple ways we can go about this. If you have something dark and black you can put at the back, happy days. A really easy one is to use a reflector and just have the black side and use that as a backdrop. When you're shooting small subjects like brownies and things, that's more than enough. And you can take that with you wherever you go. Another way to darken the background is by using something called inverse square law. It's something I've talked about in videos in the past. Inverse square law is a principle in lighting. You can use inverse square law to your advantage in so many different ways. Take a look at my other videos for more details on that. But in this case, because I've got a white wall, I'm going to show you how to darken that quite considerably by using this lighting trick. Inverse square law sounds pretty complicated, but it's actually fairly simple. You can use it to determine the amount of light fall off you're going to get from your subject. You can use that to your advantage because if flash is your only light source, you can light the subject pretty intensely, and that way everything around the background and surrounding areas is going to be much, much darker. So we just concentrate a lot of light very close to the subject, and even though the light's bouncing around the rest of the room, that area is going to be very bright and everything else will be very dark. Sounds pretty logical, right? So I guess firstly we need some brownies. So I'm going to use a slate as a surface to pile up my brownie pieces on. I'm going to try and avoid having too much of the wood shown because I'm using a lot of the same wood textures throughout many of the images, so I'm going to try and avoid that if I can. For this setup I'm going to try using this little softbox. This is my favourite travel softbox. It's the Hex 21 Speedbox by Calumet. It's a really small and light softbox that travels with me everywhere I go, and it's perfect for portraiture, product photography and all sorts. This light stand travels with me everywhere as well. This is the Nano Pole stand by Manfrotto. Brilliant piece of kit. Genuinely getting my ruler out for this. Perfect. Again, I am using the 100mm macro for this. So this flash is in group A. I might add another flash in a moment. I've got my flash trigger set up in GR mode, and GR mode is going to allow me to control those groups individually. So you can see I've got the light very close to the subject. You know, I'm obviously going for a very tight shot here. I've got it almost totally over the top, but slightly behind. What that's going to do is just give me some nice shadows to play with. But what I don't want is those shadows to be completely black. I don't want to lose detail in the shadows. So I might add a reflector in, or I might add another light source in. But one thing we can look at is how this white wall is looking. So you can see in those images how we can get a light background to look quite dark. If you took it to extremes, you could probably get it to near black, but obviously it's much easier just to use a black background. I don't actually have a normal black background roll, so I'm just going to use a reflector. Obviously it's a small subject, so you could use quite a small reflector. Brownies don't really need a reflector this big, but I've bought this thing now, so I'm going to get my money's worth. Alright, so it might be a little bit hard to see what I've got set up here. I'll try and show you as clearly as possible. I've got one larger softbox pointing down at the brownies from slightly behind, so there's a slight angle to this, because again I don't want that sort of front side getting too bright. And then I've got another softbox over here, my little softbox, that's going to be pushing light from the side. So when I approach lighting, I try and do it so it looks natural. If you start doing stuff that it looks really flashy, it's a very different image. What I want to be able to produce here is something that looks like daylight coming through a window. Now arguably we could just use window light for that, but if I'm shooting in a studio and I want consistent results every time, actual daylight makes things difficult, because it might be cloudy, it might be sunny, and we have very little control over how much light there is. This way I'm able to get exactly what I want every time. I'm quite happy with the layout now. I'm reasonably happy with the composition. So now I'm going to start adding the details. So I've got flour here, I've got some cocoa, I've even got some walnut pieces. Most importantly, I've got some dark chocolate, which I'm very looking forward to tucking into. Yeah, this is definitely going to make the image. I'm going to start with the flour. So I'm going for a slightly asymmetrical look on this. So the aim is to go for something a bit messy. No one would actually ever really present the food like this, but it looks great for photos. Let's try that. It's really great to find other textures and colours to use underneath anything you're photographing. Another thing you can do is just raid your girlfriend's cupboard and pulled out some dresses, and they've made for some really beautiful shots. And now I've got food all over them. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put it back and pretend it didn't happen. And when she wears them next, I'll just say it was always there. What do we think? My colour? For me, the most important part of styling your shoot is getting the colour schemes right. Using complementary colours or contrasting colours, having a strong colour theme just really brings the picture together. You don't always have to have a huge colour range in your images. I've gone for a really monotone look, and I'm really thinking about the name of the company, the Copper Kitchen. So I've gathered together all the items in my house that are copper. I've used a roughly copper coloured dress as a material on the bottom, and the copper biscuit. Bringing all these elements together to really suit the brand will set your work apart. I could very easily have just shot these biscuits on a slate like I did earlier, and they would have looked lovely, but it wouldn't have said anything about the company that made them. Okay, so we've done a few setups with food. We've used natural light, we've used flash, we've used natural light and flash, but one thing we've not really had to deal with so far is reflections. So what happens if we want to shoot glass? Glass can be quite tricky to shoot because of lots of reflections, and you don't want to get lighting stand reflections in your shot. You've got to really control the reflections that are showing in the image, which means we have to be quite careful with lighting. So far, a lot of what we've been doing is use quite a few soft boxes and light stands and things. But for this, I'm going to show you something really simple. It's a one light setup with a couple of reflectors. Now it's going to be a very minimalist image. There's not going to be a lot going on there. It won't be saying much about the bottle. But what it'll do is help you think about lighting in a slightly different way. Okay, so let's say you don't have a studio setup, you don't really have strip boxes and soft boxes to use for lighting bottles, or even just say you've got one flash gun. What I'm going to do here is effectively make one flash gun look like multiple. So I'm going to use the diffusion panel from the inside of a reflector. So if you've got a 5-in-1 reflector, you can take off the outside, and I've placed that against the back of my surface. But it's not going to become my background. I'm actually going to stick something in front of that. As I said, I'm going for something really simple here, so I'm just going to go for a little black background. And then I'm going to put a flash gun behind that and just fire a flash at the reflector. It's going to make that a nice large light source. I'm going to zoom the flash as far out as possible, go wide. You can actually go a little bit wider if you pull out that little flap at the front. That's a wide angle adapter, or wide angle panel. We'll go for a bottle of wine. I think a bottle of wine suits quite a minimalist look. This is actually a bottle of wine my uncle bought me from India. India makes good wine, as it turns out. So immediately what you can see is I've got that separation from the background and the bottle, and that's come from these two strips of light on either side. So what's happened is I've effectively made that side of the backdrop one light source and that side another light source. And we've even got some overhead light as well. We can control that a little bit if we wanted to. We can remove the top half if we wanted to, just by covering that reflector. And then all I've done is put a flag up the top of the reflector. So a little business card is sticking out the top of the reflector just to stop the light going and hitting the ceiling. And it's just taken out some of the light that's hit the ceiling and caused another reflection in the bottle. If there's small reflections in it, we can take those out in post-production. So what I've done is I've used the inside of a reflector on the back, and then I've used two more reflectors on either side at the front. Now they are acting both as flags and reflectors, so they're just bouncing light back at the bottle. They're also flagging the light from coming into my lens from the sides, because what's happening, because the light sources are on both sides facing me, I'm getting a lot of flare into the lens, which is causing a reduction in contrast. So I need to flag that as well as bounce light back into the bottle. Ideally, I'd actually just use two big white pieces of card, or if you're in a studio, those big poly boards, they'd be perfect. So this is an inexpensive way of shooting with one light source and getting really polished looking images of glass. There's still a couple of little reflections from the ceiling that I've not managed to get rid of, but they're not in any position where it would be difficult to remove in post. So I'm not going to worry too much about those. Now that we've done a classy looking but very simple setup, I'm changing things up for this one. I want the light to be a little bit more directional, I want a little bit more context, and I want a little bit more shape and interest going on in the image. So I've got my monkey shoulder whiskey. I picked that purely because it's a cool looking bottle. As you can see, I've got that big diffusion panel up on your right hand side, and I've just put a dark blue bedsheet at the back as a background. I've angled the table so that the composition is going to have a nice diagonal line going through it where the table just falls away. And it's a two light setup. So I've got flash gun shooting through this diffusion panel. I've actually put a softbox on the flash before it hits this, because I bought a cheap reflector. What happens is in the reflection you get these sharp lines appearing in the middle of the diffusion panel, and that's where the flash gun is firing through. And that's down to the type of material that they use on these panels. Some of the more expensive ones are much better and they don't have that issue. So to just reduce that particular highlight, I've put a softbox on it. You can think of this lighting technique similar to how they light things for films. They have a bare light source and then a scrim to soften that light source. Whereas in photography, we tend to use softboxes. For this image, I want more than just a bottle. I really want to make it look quite appetizing. I'm not much of a whiskey drinker. I'm more of a fabulous cocktail kind of guy. So I'm going to make some sort of cocktail. I've got some very fancy looking glassware. I've got some cinnamon sticks. And because I'm probably going to make an old fashioned or something along those lines, I've got some orange and stuck in the oven to dry. Pretty solid. I definitely didn't burn half of them. And then of course the tricky bit is ice. If you want really nice clear looking ice cubes, the best way is to boil water and freeze that. It's supposed to dry completely clear. Now I tried that and it didn't quite work. But regardless, that only allows you a few minutes to shoot before the ice melts too much. So what I've got are brilliant little acrylic ice cubes, which I bought on Amazon for really cheap. But when you put them in a glass with some liquid, you can't tell the difference between this and ice. And it makes my life so much easier. So this is actually a 2-light setup. I've got another light at the back firing across. That's not a speed light, that's actually my Bowen's XMT 500. But it was already mounted there. A speed light would do exactly the same thing. The key thing with shots like this is to not over-clutter the image. Have a couple of accessories. You could possibly put in one of those fancy cocktail mixing spoons in there. But if you start overloading it with loads of stuff, it gets distracting, too busy, and takes the focus away from the product. For the last few looks, we've been striving for soft light, really soft with smooth shadows, but we shouldn't ignore really hard light sources as an option. I really love shooting with really bright colours and one really strong hard light source. It makes for amazingly punchy images. It's particularly great to get that summery type vibe because the sun's such a harsh light source. We immediately associate those hard shadows with sunlight. So for this one, I've got a beautiful bottle of gin. And there's these sort of, it's Silent Pool gin. We actually used to live not too far from Silent Pool. And Silent Pool has this really beautiful blue colour to it, very similar to the colour of this bottle. So I really want to show that off. So obviously, bright light source, water. I'm going for a very summery, almost beach-like vibe. Don't know how much you can tell from the time-lapse then, but I did really want to have this pink and white canvas in this image too. I just thought it would really suit this sort of summery beachside vibe, but it was just really distracting, and I will put a couple of the images up, and I couldn't make it look as nice as I thought I would be able to. It just teaches you not to be precious about your ideas. They might not always work. So to accompany that, I'm going to make a cocktail with some bright colours. I'm going to bring some fruit in, and I've gone for a bright yellow backdrop. And what I want to do is have those shadows fall off onto the background. The key thing to getting a convincing hard light source is to have it as far away from what you're photographing as possible. Because what happens if you have it very close, you get shadows going off in different directions. Because the light's going like that in a wedge, so you get these shadows going off in different directions, and it doesn't look very convincing. The further away it is, the less variance you're going to get in those shadows. I've made a cocktail, it's actually just water, disappointingly. Some cucumber in there, so it looks like a bit of a gin and tonic. And I'm just going to add a little bit of dressing to the table, just to make it look a little bit more interesting. But we're nearly there. Got some all-important strawberries to put on the table. It's not British summer without some beautiful M&S strawberries, is it? Now just before I sort of finish off the final layout for this image, one thing that's getting lost is the colour of the blue from the bottle. And often that'll happen with liquids or glass or anything that's translucent. You'll lose a lot of the colour. And a really easy, nifty trick of getting that back is to put some white paper behind it, and it'll bounce the light back through and you'll keep all of that colour. It is the simplest way of doing it. This shot took quite a lot of tweaking to get it quite the way I wanted it. In terms of lighting, it's now a 3-light setup. I added a light here, just to add some light to the logo in the bottle. And then the same thing on this side. I've got this light doing a similar job. And this light particularly is catching the fruit and making them really vibrant and pop. And then the last light source that we have, last light source is just there. That's a flash on some board games. And I had to move that light source much lower than I had it earlier. I needed the light to be almost level with the bottle and glass to spread the shadow onto the background the way I wanted it. In terms of camera settings, I've got 3 groups in this, A, B and C. A is my hard light source, and then B is my large softbox, and C is my little softbox. The little softbox, because it's a bit smaller, I don't need it quite as powerful as the big softbox, but they're essentially even power when you take into account the amount of light loss that you get in this softbox. But the hard light source is a stop brighter than either of these, and it needs to be brighter. I want to have some interesting shadows on the background that aren't necessarily from anything in the image. This is something you can play around with. If you've got quite a boring environment or a simple background, or even a white wall, you can just use leaves or we've got a fake fern thing that I'm going to use for this, just to create shadows on the backdrop. And you can use this in quite a lot of interesting ways. You can cut out a little grid shape and create the shadow of windows to go on the wall. There's lots to be played with here. In order,
Oh, I see. Sorry.
Because I don't have lots of arms, I'm going to rope in Jade here to to wave the fern in front of the backdrop for me. You could obviously use another light stand and a clamp for that, but it just makes it easier. Voice activated light stand here. Voice activated plant stand here. All the images that you've seen so far have been mostly unedited. The only things I've done is increase contrast a little bit, brighten them in some cases, and added a little bit of sharpening and exported at the right size to put on the video. The only thing left now for me to do is to finish up the images. I'm not going to take you through my whole process, but I will show you some before and after images. Essentially what I'm looking for is to remove small distractions like bits of dust, crumbs, or misplaced herbs, things like that, and just to tidy it up a little bit. On the glass bottles, I'm looking to clean up some of the reflections, mostly just to ensure you can't see me if you zoom in. Also on the bottles, I'm really making sure that the logo is very clearly visible. What I don't want is really harsh reflections coming off on the logo so that you can't see it, or it's not quite bright enough to see the logo, anything like that. And then all I've got to do is do a little bit of colour work. Now that might just be colour corrections to make sure that everything's colour accurate, or it might be stylistically to complement the colours in the image. So my top tips for food photography is keep it simple. Try not to overload the scene with lots of little accessories and try to keep the focus on the main subject. Think about your colour scheme, whether you go for strong contrasting colours, complementary colours or a pretty monochromatic look. A well thought out colour scheme can really make an image. Add movement for a more dynamic image. This is something we didn't do in this video, but can really make for some really incredible images. Think about pouring liquid into the glass, or sifting icing sugar on top of the brownies, or dropping berries into things. Steam or smoke really help. There's so many options for movement. It changes the scene from a still life into something that's a little bit more alive. Think about your output, so where your images are going to end up, because then you can shoot the images to maximize impact for the platform they're being used on. And lastly, think about the story. Pick your props, scene, lighting and colour scheme to suit the main subject you're photographing. I think that makes the biggest difference. Thank you all so much for watching. I will be back for one more video soon. I'm also on YouTube at Raj K Photo, and you can also find me on Instagram. I'll be sure to answer any questions you have in the comments and live chat stream. And now I'm just going to leave you with the clip on tethering that I promised you at the beginning. Something else I want to show you that I'm going to be using during this shoot is the ability to shoot tethered to a computer. What that means is I'm able to take a picture and it appears on my computer screen almost immediately. This used to be done entirely cabled, and that's fine, it's very fast on a cable, but obviously you are limited in flexibility in terms of movement because you've got this cable coming out of your camera all the time. I'm shooting on a Canon EOS R, so this may vary depending on the camera that you have, but if you have a Canon, I'm sure it'll be very similar. All we need to do this is hit the menu button, and we're going to cycle across to the yellow menu and go to the fifth one across. That has wireless communication settings. Now this might be slightly different on your camera as I mentioned, but wireless communication settings is what you're after. Then I'm going to hit Wi-Fi settings, enable that. You can have your camera require a password so that your connection is secured. And then we hit Wi-Fi function. Because this hasn't been set up before, I need to set a name, so I'm just going to leave it as EOS R. I can have this connect to a smartphone and control it from there, but that is more for control of the camera rather than shooting tethered so that it just appears on the screen. So what I want to do is go across to Remote Control EOS Utility, register a device for connection. What it's going to do is set up its own Wi-Fi hotspot. So you don't need to be connected to the internet in order to do this. You can set this up anywhere you like. So you can set this up in a desert if you needed to. But I'm going to set this up to connect to my home Wi-Fi. That way I don't have to disconnect my computer from the internet. So I can hit switch network. Then all I have to do is find my network and type in the password. You can also use connect with WPS if your router has this. That's my Wi-Fi network, but I'm going to connect with WPS. Now that I've connected to the Wi-Fi with the camera, all I need to do is start the software on my computer and it'll automatically find my camera. In order to do this, we need to open EOS Utility. If you don't have EOS Utility, you can download it from Canon's website. Open EOS Utility and click Pairing over Wi-Fi and LAN. You might need to make some changes to your firewall settings to allow it to happen. And you can see there, it's found my camera on the network. Connect it. And now it's just asking for you to confirm it. Now if we go back to the desktop, EOS Utility is automatically starting for me. Now that we're connected, all we have to do is hit Remote Shooting. And this window will pop up. If we wanted to, hit Live View Shoot and we can actually take control of the camera remotely and see what it's seeing from the computer. So that screen will come up. There's a little bit of lag because my network's struggling a little bit. However, as we're transmitting over Wi-Fi, I don't really want to be sending over the raw images. I just want to send a JPEG so that I can see a preview of it. So I'm going to go ahead and hit this button here. And that allows me to determine whether images are saved on the computer or on the camera or both. What I want to do is set it to the middle one, which is computer and camera memory card. I also want to hit in RAW and JPEG mode, only transfer the JPEGs to the computer, and then hit OK. Now what I want to do is change the settings on the camera to allow it to shoot both RAW and JPEG. I can do that from this software as well, so I hit this button here and then ask it to say RAW and a small JPEG. I don't really need to see a full resolution image, I just need to see it bigger than the screen on the camera, that way I get a better idea for the details. So small JPEG works fine for me. Now when I take a picture, it appears on the screen. There's multiple reasons I might want to shoot tethered. If you're working as part of a team, it means that multiple people can see the images more comfortably and they can see the details. But even if you're just working on your own, you're able to get a better idea of what the image is really going to look like. You can also have it run straight through software to apply a look. So if you're using Lightroom, you can actually have Lightroom apply a look to the image so that you get a better idea of what it's going to look like when it's finished. But crucially, you can see the details far better using this method than you can on the back of the camera. Thank you all so much for watching. Goodbye.